Let's go ahead and take a look at these examples. We're going to be finding the exact value of each of these expressions, and we're not going to be using a calculator. We're actually going to rewrite these expressions using our fundamental identities. So for part A, we have 1 over cosecant squared of 35 degrees plus cosine squared of 35 degrees. So let's go ahead and take a look at this fraction, and let's go ahead and do some rewriting. I can break this into two fractions. This is the same thing as 1 over cosecant of 35 degrees times 1 over cosecant of 35 degrees. Notice I didn't change the problem at all there. If you take a look and multiply 1 times 1, I'm going to get 1 on top. And cosecant of 35 degrees times cosecant of 35 degrees is what gave me that cosecant squared. And I still have the rest of the problem. I'm still adding my cosine squared of 35 degrees. And now I can go ahead and rewrite these fractions using one of the fundamental identities. Now, we have the list from earlier, and you can keep that handy and reference it. And remember that this fraction is not on our original list, but in a previous example, we had taken some time to actually rewrite one of our identities. And if you recall, we rewrote one of them and solved it for sine of theta. And if you go back in your notes, you'll probably have that sine of theta is the same thing as 1 over cosecant of theta. And that's the identity we're going to be using for this problem. So I can rewrite each of these fractions as sine of 35 degrees. And keep in mind that's the same thing as sine squared of 35 degrees if I multiply them together. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy down the rest of the problem here. I'm adding my cosine squared of 35 degrees. And if you refer back to your fundamental identities one more time, you'll realize that we can actually simplify this expression. This is actually part of our Pythagorean triple. Sine squared of an angle measure, in this case 35 degrees, plus cosine squared of that same angle measure, 35 degrees. This is going to simplify to a positive 1 as our final answer. Now let's go ahead and take a look at part B. This time we're working with radians instead of degrees, and that's okay. We're going to be using our fundamental identities. And in this problem, we have cosine of pi over 3 divided by sine of pi over 3. That whole fraction minus cotangent of pi over 3. And again, we're not using a calculator, so we're going to go ahead and use our fundamental identities. And when I'm looking at this fraction, I have a cosine of some angle measure on top and sine of that same angle measure on the bottom. I'm going to be allowed to rewrite this as cotangent. I'm going to use that same angle measure, pi over 3. And then I'm going to copy the rest of the problem. So minus cotangent of pi over 3. And then when we go to simplify this, obviously we're subtracting two pieces and they're the same. So this is going to subtract to give us our final answer of 0.